The opening of this broadcast, Andean Quagmire Years, has been delayed. Since its recording, Ecuadorian presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio was assassinated at a campaign rally on the 9th of August. Two other politicians, the mayor of Manta, Agustin Intriago, as well as an organizer for the Citizens Revolution Party, Pedro Briones, were also killed ahead of the first round snap elections. Voting proceeded on the 20th of August as scheduled. Luisa Gonzalez of the Citizens Revolution Party and protege of former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa won the first round with 33% of the votes. However, falling short of obtaining an absolute majority, or at least 40% of votes, and defeating the runner-up Daniel Noboa by a margin of 10 percentage points, a second-round head-to-head runoff is scheduled for the 15th of October. Noboa of the National Democratic Action Party and son of one of the richest men in the country, Alvaro Noboa, a tycoon in the banana industry, came in second place at 23%. In a landmark referendum coinciding with the snap election, voters registered a resounding no to oil extraction in Yasuni National Park. Located in the Amazon region, it's the largest protected area in Ecuador, with immense petroleum reserves beneath Yasuni land. In a statement released by the Yasunidos, the indigenous collective noted, "This is the first time a country chooses to defend life and leave petroleum underground." This podcast miniseries looks back at some of the dramatic social and political events over the past years leading up to Ecuador's 2023 snap election.
Nos estamos jugando de este gobierno desastroso, nefasto.
Hay que seguir trabajando en el fortalecimiento de las Fuerzas Armadas, la Policía Nacional.
La capacitación en Policía Nacional,
el personal de Fuerzas Armadas, la cancha de vóley para jugar un eco a vóley. Y ahí le doy la chulla y todos tomamos un misquitullito.
Ecuador is gearing up for general snap elections on the 20th of August this year. A new National Assembly, Congress, and President of the Republic will be voted into office. Announced in May, when incumbent head of state Guillermo Lasso dissolved the legislative body in a constitutional move known as La Muerte Cruzada, two-way death, the measure would effectively bring an end to his presidency, as well as investigations into corruption and a possible impeachment process against the embattled leader. Presidential candidate Luisa Gonzalez of the Citizens Revolution Party currently leads the polls to win the first-round vote. How did Ecuador, the second smallest country in South America, descend into such political chaos and turmoil, events accompanied by a dramatic economic crisis preceding the COVID-19 pandemic? To unfold this recent chapter of its history, we'll turn back the clock a few years, back to October 2019, when indigenous groups, workers, and students ramped up the stakes, taking to the streets as part of a nationwide strike against austerity and the International Monetary Fund.
With the blood of our indigenous people and our brothers. Stop lying. They are lying. What does the press know? They say we're armed. No, we've taken to the streets to demand our rights. I'm from Tungurahua province. I've come with my family, my children. My family is prepared to struggle because of this good-for-nothing government. Brothers and sisters, let's fight until death. Until death.
El gobierno no ha dado paso para nada. Mis hermanos, vamos a la lucha. Hasta el último, mis hermanos. Lucharemos hasta que...
Quito, City of Spring, metropolis situated in the Andes. 2,850 meters, or approximately 9,350 feet above sea level. Capital of Ecuador, the oldest on the continent, Indo-America. Its historic center, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Typically flocked with gringos, roaming tourists have fled the scene, dashing expeditiously back to their posh B&Bs or hotel rooms. These are the early days of October 2019, and the streets of Quito replete with anything but happy, smiley, indigenous, and working-class people.
Down with this corrupt government. This is the people's struggle. The people's struggle. The people's struggle. The people's struggle. Down with the assassin military soldiers and policemen. Down with this corrupt government. Assassins!
Faced with the fresh round of austerity measures announced by Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno, public transport unions, taxi drivers, and other sectors of the working class have called and are now on a national strike.
These protests started after this dishonest and traitorous government led by Lenín Moreno implemented economic measures against the people. All recommendations sent by the IMF are being adhered to. They are violating the rights of the workers. Now they have declared a curfew at 3 p.m. right here in Quito. They're deploying the military and police to kill people. This is the order they've just announced on television. It is unjust. In respect to international law, to all international organizations, we need assistance. Moreno is declaring himself to be a dictator in our country. He wants to sell our country to the IMF. He wants to create an all-boys club. But we won't allow this. The people have taken to the streets and struggled. The people are here, standing against this traitorous, coward, shameless man. Thank you.
Aquí está el pueblo para dar la cara y afrontar a este señor traidor, un cobarde y un sinvergüenza. Gracias.
In exchange for a $4.2 billion IMF loan, the government promised wage cuts by 20%, annual vacation time slashed in half, and a mandatory day's wage paid to state coffers each month. The backbreaker, however, was a fuel subsidy cut, one that guaranteed an increase in food prices and cost of living across the board. According to the government's own figures, diesel more than doubled, increasing from $1.03 to $2.30 per gallon on Thursday, the 3rd of October. Gasoline, for its part, rose from $1.85 to $2.39. The subsequent groundswell was inevitable. Hundreds, if not thousands, converged upon the public trolley central bank transportation stop just meters from Simón Bolívar's statue at the entrance to Quito's historical center. This point serves as a divisor between the road leading to the affluent North Central from the road leading to the working class and poor Centro and Southern communities. The Kichwa, Shuar, Sequoia, the full breadth of the 14 indigenous nations, including Afro-Ecuadorians, the poor and working class, they all hit the streets to express their disquiet and an end to austerity, officially dubbed Decree 883. We were just a stone's throw away from Plaza Grande in Quito's historic center, seat of Carondelet Presidential Palace, as riot police took action. Tanks, armor-clad riot police and their dogs, undercover agents, helicopters, and drones, untold amounts of tear gas, the full gamut of the security apparatus was deployed against demonstrators. Faced with so much tear gas smoke, people resorted to inhaling bundles of fresh eucalyptus leaves to help ameliorate the effects and cleanse their lungs. From so-called non-lethal projectiles fired at them, nearly 100 lost partial or total eyesight. Julio Anibal Flores received permanent brain damage. This is Julio.
I've been a leftist since I was young. I attended Mejia High School, where I began to learn the meaning of a citizen's revolution. Then, Rafael Correa was elected, and thanks to him, our country changed. In 2019, it was our duty as Ecuadorians, as Quiteños, to take to the streets in October against Decree 883. But for me, the consequences are just becoming clear. A year and a half later, I have permanent brain damage from being shot. I get lost or disorientated. But my friends, this fight is to the death because it's the only fight that matters.
Me pierdo, me desoriento, pero bueno, esto hay que seguirlo hasta la muerte, compañeros.
As widespread mobilization continued and police repression intensified, mainstream media in Ecuador started to air programs totally unrelated to the dramatic events taking place on the streets. Journalist Alexis Moncayo.
Los reporteros y las reporteras de los canales de televisión.
TV journalists took to the streets in October 2019 with specific orders. Once they began reporting from the streets and people started to speak against the government, they would simply take away the microphone. The truth is, we're fed up with this government. They're liars. We oppose these unpopular measures.
But don't you think that the police and the military keep you safe?
Excuse me, don't you work for public media? What's your name?
Excuse me? I am the one interviewing you.
Right, but you keep cutting me off with other questions and don't let me make my point. And we're recording too, to check how the media is operating. We know that you're here with specific orders.
Y por eso estamos grabando también para comprobar el trabajo de los medios de comunicación. Sabemos que tienen consignas específicas.
Se profundiza también esa enorme división.
October 2019 also deepened the divide in terms of political opinion and media coverage. On one side were political players and social leaders supporting the government, as well as mainstream media partners in crime with Moreno's administration. On the other side were small media outlets that were in the trenches, emerging from alternative spaces. They tried to report what was really happening on the streets. For example, what we saw was that TV channels were airing cartoons while small radio stations were broadcasting on Facebook Live or other digital platforms. They were there, on the ground, trying their best to broadcast what was happening with the indigenous movement protests.
Estaban en el Parque El Arbolito tratando de transmitir lo que sucedía con la revuelta del movimiento indígena.
Journalist Carla Salomé Coronel.
Si tú tienes una línea editorial.
If you're forced to follow an editorial line where they tell you what you can say or who you're allowed to interview, then you're not giving your audience one of the main tenets of journalism, which is pluralism. This means opening up your platform to all sectors, because if I only report one side of a story, how am I going to contrast my sources? If I do not allow my audiences to learn about all sides, then that's because I'm answering to particular interests, whether it may be economic or political. This is very common in Ecuador.
Que por lo general es lo que sucede aquí.
And here's Andrés Durán, founder and director of the independent media house Voces.
El periodismo sigue atado a grandes intereses económicos y políticos.
Journalism in Ecuador is too often linked to political and economic interests. We are stuck in a vicious cycle where people from the same race, the same gender, the same social class determine what can and cannot be published.
Lo que se publica y lo que no se publica.
No tenemos Estado. No tenemos ningún Estado. No tenemos presidente. No tenemos presidente. Porque estos terroristas son solamente parte de Ecuador. Monstruo terrorista, cortador de cabezas, Lenín Moreno. Para nada.
The national strike had quickly transformed into mass protests, triggering the declaration of a state of emergency. The government, including President Moreno himself, hauled ass, transferring operations from the Andean capital to the coastal city of Guayaquil. Asked why he had abandoned Quito, Moreno told the BBC, quote, because in the end, they, They, meaning protesters, were coming after me, end quote.
Wait a sec. This makes no sense. President Lenin Moreno is a member of the Citizens' Revolution, the progressive political party of his predecessor Rafael Correa, a comrade of the regionally based Pink Tide, together with President Lula of Brazil, the Kirchners of Argentina, Evo Morales in Bolivia, and others. Moreno was also Correa's vice president from 2007 to 2013. And was it not Correa himself who supported Moreno hand in glove during his presidential election campaign in 2017?
All true. But if you're asking what happened along the way, well, here's what people on the streets of Quito have to say. According to Messias Tatamues, director of the Workers' United Front, Ecuador's government had succumbed to, quote, rewarding the big banks, the capitalists, and punishing poor Ecuadorians, end quote. Military units were deployed by the streets of Quito and curfew was declared. Undeterred, the protests not only continued but intensified. To express their disgust, communities resorted to panelazo, that is, banging pots and pans, on the 9th or 10th night of the protests. Sunrise and the makeshift street camps remained packed. Another day of mass protests proceeded as usual, with Quito International Airport completely shut down and highway roadblocks nationwide. Ecuador was closed for business and the government was feeling the heat. With no end to the mobilization in sight, at around 10 o'clock Sunday night, October 13th, Moreno's administration announced the rescinding of Decree 883. Fireworks, panelazos of joy, and elation erupted across most of the city, particularly the historic center and South Quito. The streets leading to Casa de la Cultura swelled with people marching towards its domed stadium, a symbol of resistance, where tens of thousands of indigenous people had set up camp days earlier. Now, their leaders spoke to the crowd.
What a marvelous night it is. How are you? Here we are, indigenous people, damn it. We're from Tungurahua province.
Hermanos y hermanas de nuestro querido país Ecuador.
Brothers and sisters of our beloved country of Ecuador, to the youth and students, where are the youth? Where are the brave women? Thank you to each one of you. 13 days of struggle and resistance. They haven't been in vain, comrades.
Bien. Muchas gracias a cada uno de ustedes. Estos 13 días de lucha, de resistencia, no ha sido en vano, compañeros y compañeras.
What did we say? We'll sustain the struggle until Decree 883 is rescinded. Mission completed, comrades.
Decreto 883. Misión cumplida, compañeros y compañeras.
Many people wanted to divide the force of the indigenous movement in Ecuador. Many people thought that CONAE simply represents the indigenous people and nationalities. But at this point, CONAE is all of Ecuador, comrades.
La CONAE en este momento es todo el Ecuador, compañeros y compañeras.
IMF, hit the road. IMF, hit the road.
October 2019, 12 days of a national strike represented a serious challenge to Lenin Moreno's government specifically, and policies betraying a progressive political project preceding it in general. In fact, his presidential victory was predicated on the success and direction the country was going prior to his seating as head of state. In contrast, Correa's administration had sent the U.S. military personnel packing its bags to Uncle Sam. It had implemented social development projects such as the building of public and technical schools and local hospitals and clinics, improved highways connecting rural areas with major cities, university grant programs allowing students to study abroad, and more. While all was not perfect, namely a contentious relationship between Correa's government with the main indigenous socio-political advocacy group CONAIE, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, it was a far cry from Moreno's swift welcoming back of U.S. troops on the Galapagos Islands and austerity.
It was also during Moreno's government that Ecuador's judicial system started to tally one criminal case after the next against Correa. By now, feeling the weight of lawfare sweeping the region, the former president had relocated to Brussels with his Belgian wife, stating that he had, quote, left Ecuador without as much as a single traffic ticket, end quote. Now, he had accumulated over 20 criminal cases, including charges of corruption. The former head of state repeatedly proclaimed innocence, that these were classic examples of lawfare, in the vein of Lula's conviction and imprisonment in Brazil during the 2018 presidential election campaign, precisely when he led all polls to defeat his rival, Jair Bolsonaro. Even Interpol, the international police force, denied official requests by the Ecuadorian government to detain Correa based on insufficient evidence. With that, the former head of state continued traveling as a free man wherever his heart so desired, except one country, Ecuador, where a warrant for his arrest was issued and remains in effect to this day. The period inaugurated a first of its kind, lawfare enshrined on a plaque detailing the criminal cases against Correa and erected on a wall outside Carondelet Presidential Palace in plain view of the public.
This plaque represents the worst crime committed against the Ecuadorian people because the Ecuadorian people are very conscious of the injustices perpetrated by some invalid judges to convict the economist and ex-president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa.
Juicios que no tienen totalmente validez de la culpabilidad del economista Rafael Correa, expresidente del Ecuador.
Esa placa representa como una, ¿cómo te puedo decir? Traición no puede ser.
This plaque means, how can I say this? It's not a betrayal. It's a plaque produced by the right wing to communicate to the people bad things committed by Correa. But these are all lies, falsehoods. But that's what they claim.
Cuando no tiene sentido alguno.
There was no reason at all to hand down this sentence, and that's why, as of today, Ecuador is known around the world for this unjust scam. This plaque must be removed because it's offensive to our president, Rafael Correa.
Digno e ilustre señor presidente Rafael Correa.
Political sails in the opposite direction had set its course. Moreno's rescinding of Decree 883 cleared the streets of mass protests, reopening the city and country and allowing the president to emerge from his Guayaquil sanctuary or bunker. However, as fate would have it, Moreno would survive to complete his presidential term in 2021, but not before implementing austerity measures, slashing the public sector budget to the tune of $4 billion in May 2020 during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Again, people took to the streets, but due to lockdown measures, it was a needle compared to the previous year's national strike haystack.
Nevertheless, the politics of the day steamrolled ahead and his presidential term came to an end on the 24th of May 2021. Moreno peacefully handed over power to a blast from the past, former Minister of the Economy and now President-elect Guillermo Lasso.
Un saludo al pueblo ecuatoriano en este glorioso día.
Greetings to the Ecuadorian people on this glorious day. Today, the 24th of May 2021, exactly 1 year away from the bicentennial of the Battle of Pichincha, the last of various deeds consecrating the independence of our nation, beginning the process of our trajectory to Republican life.
Y que dieron inicio a nuestro trayecto hacia la vida republicana. Es un día de rememoración.
It's a day of remembrance, but above all, it's a day of renewal for the government born today as before itself the responsibility to lead us into a new century of Ecuadorian republicanism. Today, we should examine if, after these 200 years, we've attained the republican ideals incumbent upon us from our founding.
De esos ideales republicanos que nos vieron nacer.
Thanks for joining us on the part 1 of Andean Quagmire Years, live from Ecuador. Your host is Raquel Benavides. Our co-host is Kijan Ains. Our story editor and producer is Julian Arcola. Music by father and son duo Manuel and Alvaro Taipe. Sound design by Awacha Shortwave Radio. Voiceovers by Kanekwa Kachinga. Jess at Beware the Radio.
Muchas gracias. ¡Con Sashu Luna Cuna! ¡Con Sashu Mishukuna!